Do you believe in miracles? What if miracles are true? What if there was a miracle that had 100,000 witnesses? Would you believe that? Well, I've already discussed that miracle called the miracle of the sun in another video. But in my never-ending search to find bona fide miracles, I've stumbled upon a real doozy. Brace yourself, because it's extraordinary. And absolutely, bar none, the most well-documented miracle in history. This one is something, really something. First, let's define what a miracle is. A miracle is a thing that occurs, an event that has happened for which there is no scientific or natural laws that can explain it. And it's usually a welcome thing, and it's therefore considered to be of divine origin. So the miracle that I'm going to talk about today is quite an extraordinary one. It's documented in a book called Il Miracolo by Vittore Missori. Now, the author started off reluctant to believe that this was legit. But the more he dived into the dusty old records, the more convinced he became that this was a miracle he just could not deny. Stick around to the end because he has some very profound thoughts on why it is that miracles can be so hard for us to believe. I think you're going to want to hear this. So what's this story all about?
It happened to a man named Miguel Juan Pellicer, who was born at the end of July in the year of our Lord, 1617, in Spain. He was from a town called Calanda in the Kingdom of Aragon. As a fit young man, he started working on his uncle's farm at the age of 19 at Castellon, 60 kilometers from Valencia. He worked very long days and was often very tired. One day, while riding his mule, which was pulling a cart heavily laden with wheat, he apparently fell asleep and fell off the mule. Well, the wheel of the wagon ran over his leg, crushing it badly due to the weight of the cart. He initially received treatment at Castellon, but was then admitted to the hospital at Valencia, where he stayed for 5 days. He then decided it would be better to go to Zaragoza for better treatment, especially since it was a hospital dedicated to Our Lady of the Pillar. He had always been an extremely devout Catholic and devoted to the Virgin Mary. It took him 50 days to travel there, so it was a long and arduous journey. Upon his arrival, it was very evident that the leg was in an advanced state of decay, and he had gangrene. Doctors told him that if they did not operate to remove the bottom part of his leg, he would die. These same doctors would later testify at the trial investigating his miracle that his leg was turning black, very phlegmonious, and gangrenous. In mid-October, 2 master surgeons, Juan de Estanga and Diego Mirarula, carried out the surgery to remove the gangrenous lower leg. They specified in their testimony that the leg was cut 4 fingers below the knee. Now, there were no anesthetics back in 1640, so all the surgeons could do was give him alcohol and drug him up with drinks to help with the pain, which was so excruciating that witnesses testified that in his torment, the young man called upon the Virgin of the Pillar unceasingly and with great fervor. Once the surgery was done, and as was the custom at the time, the amputated part of the leg was buried in a special part of the hospital ceremony. His stub was cauterized with fire. Now you can just imagine how painful that must have been. He was kept in the hospital, recovering for several months until the spring of 1638. For the next 2 years, he had to beg to support himself and was granted permission to do so outside the sanctuary of Pillar. He was a very familiar sight to a large number of people that lived in the area of Zaragoza. At that time, the population was probably between 20 and 30,000 people. He went for regular follow-up visits to his doctor, Dr. Estanga, so this was very well known and well documented at the time. Every evening, he would ask for some oil from the sanctuary to rub on his amputated stump of his leg. He fervently believed this would draw the aid of the Virgin upon him. Early in the year 1640, he decided to go back to Calanda to visit his parents, a journey that would take him over a week. He arrived sometime between March 11th and 14th. Calanda was a small rural town of between 1,500 and 2,000 people. Unable to work as he had been as a farm laborer, he ended up begging around the towns in the area. As a result, most people in the area came to know him very well and were aware of his situation and the whole history of his having the accident with the cart rolling over his leg. At the time he came to his parents' house, they had a guest from a nearby garrison. So they planned to have the guest use Miguel's old room, and they set up a cot in their bedroom for Miguel to sleep. On the evening of March 29th, his mother entered her bedroom and saw a person on the cot that could not have been her son. So she assumed it was a guest sleeping in the wrong bed, thinking that perhaps the guest got confused and went to sleep in the wrong room by mistake. Now, the reason that she assumed that the guest, who was a soldier, had gone to the wrong bed, the one in her room, was because in looking at the blankets, there were clearly 2 legs and 2 feet sticking out of the bottom of the blanket. This person clearly had 2 legs, 2 full complete legs, so it could not have been her son. So she called to her husband to come get the situation all sorted out. Imagine their shock at realizing that indeed it was their son and not the soldier. Impossibly, their son now had 2 legs. It had been really hard to wake him up. He was in such a deep sleep. But upon his awakening, he said that he had been dreaming of putting oil on his stump, as he had often done so during his waking hours. As you can imagine, this news spread very quickly, and the following morning, the local judge and 2 surgeons who had severed the leg examined Miguel and set up a report to be forwarded on to the higher authorities. On April 1st, Palm Sunday, Don Marco Sequer, the parish priest of a nearby village of Mazaleon, also visited Miguel, bringing a royal notary, Miguel Andro, who set up a certificate for the testimony in order to confirm the oaths from 10 people. Keep in mind that back then an oath was taken very, very seriously, so it would be unlikely, rather highly unlikely, that people were lying because they feared their mortal soul would go to hell and burn there forever if they lied under oath. On April 25th, he and his parents went to Our Lady of the Pillar to give thanks, and Miguel saw many, many people that had known him in the past and recalled seeing him with 1 leg, begging outside the sanctuary of the Virgin of Pillar in the past. Now, it's really central to this story to remember that at this time in Spain, the much-feared Spanish Inquisition was in full force and was diligent at ferreting out false miracles because they considered them heresy. The reason being is that they believed these stories of false miracles denigrated Catholicism, so they had to be investigated thoroughly. For example, during this time in Spain, you won't find any reports of Marian apparitions as were found in the same time frame in countries like France, Germany, and Italy. So a formal hearing was started into this event to determine the veracity of the claim that he had miraculously grown back his leg. The Archbishop of the city began proceedings on June 5th. This inquiry was to last about a year, and all the hearings were open to the public and recorded, documented. The public was invited to voice their dissent about the events being presented, but none came forward. So keep in mind that there would have been many records associated with this entire few years. The first time he went to the nearby hospital, the second hospital records, the formal permission to beg outside the sanctuary, and thousands of witnesses both before the amputation and after it. In fact, for the inquiry, the problem was not finding enough witnesses. The problem was limiting them because there were just so many, and the trial would have gone on for a very long time if they didn't find a way to limit them. And so the witnesses were pared back to just 24 of the very best, most reputable witnesses who were established to be the most trustworthy from among the great many who knew Miguel from both Calanda and Zaragoza. On April 27, 1641, the Archbishop officially declared the authenticity of the miracle after the lengthy process of interrogations and records inspections. Later that year, King Philip IV knelt down before Miguel and kissed his leg. Medical records of the status of his leg show that his restored leg was the same one that had been amputated 2.5 years earlier. It was determined to be the same leg because it had the same bruises and scars that were there before the amputation. These scars included one from where the wheel had run over his leg, one from an old dog bite, another from a cyst removal years before, as well as 2 deep scratches from a thorny plant that had left scars. And remember the hole where they buried the amputated leg at the hospital cemetery? Well, it was dug up and no leg could be found there. Further, there is testimony of the specialist who examined the restored leg and stated after the examination that the leg was cold and hard with contracted toes and blue in color when it was first restored. And Miguel could not put his weight on it. But over a few months, he regained his strength, the color came back, and his toes uncurled after a few days. Medical records show the restored leg was measured to be initially a few centimeters shorter due to the loss of bone tissue that was caused by the fracture. However, within 3 months, it regained its original length. Now, in the appendix of his book Il Miracolo, Vittorio includes a consultation with a modern-day specialist who states that the historical record of recovery of that leg would be exactly as would be expected if a limb were replanted onto a person's body, because this specialist was an expert in limb reimplantations. So, the expected development and the reimplantation of the leg had only one difference. Surgeons today report that when a leg is reattached, usually the growth of the leg only occurs after there is an exertion by pulling the leg to stretch it a bit, and that helps aid in its growth. Now, of course, Miguel had no such traction put on his leg, and yet it regrew back to its correct length. Vittorio notes the extensive documentation that proved this miracle, which, just to recap, includes the baptismal certificate of Miguel, proving that he did not have a twin. Second of all, the certificate set up by the notary Andrew, which is on display in the town hall of Zaragoza even today. The minutes of the proceedings at Zaragoza. Now, the original had been lost to time after being kept for centuries in Zaragoza, but at one point it was given to a Benedictine monk, Father Lambert, who took it to France in about 1930. Now, Lambert died in World War II, so it's unknown what became of the original manuscript. However, there were 4 printed editions published, the first of which was published in 1829. 2 notaries certified that these copies were correct compared to the original text, which had not yet been lost to time. There are also 2 certified copies of the minutes of the trial proceedings from the exact day as the original was signed and sealed. The copies were also signed and sealed by the same notaries. One was kept in the archives in the town of Zaragoza, but unfortunately it burnt to the ground in 1808 during the Napoleonic Wars. The other is still existing and is kept in the archives at the Cathedral of the Pillar. The report made by the local judge on the morning immediately after the events is known to have existed because there are documentary traces confirming it existed at one time. Other lesser records include registration of Miguel's admittance to the hospital in Valencia, a small booklet written by a Carmelite friar commissioned by the chapter house of the Pillar and published in 1641, and another book published by a German doctor in 1642. The Jesuit father who gave the imprimatur, which is the authorization to publish the book, added to the preface of the 1642 book in Germany a declaration that he personally knew Miguel, first with one leg and then with 2. And then there's the account of the audience that Miguel had with the royal court of Madrid, where the king kissed his leg. There are other documents that confirm the existence of other key people involved in this entire event.
So what did the cynics say about all this? The folks that just won't believe it no matter how well it's documented. What do they have to say? Well, the most famous of these is Brian Dunning. And he wrote an article very skeptical of it, and he basically dismissed the entire thing, saying it was a complete ruse, that the man's leg was probably never severed, never cut off. And then he'd probably done it because he discovered that, if he could get a lot of money begging with 2 legs, boy, how much could you get if he only had one? So he tied his leg up and as a hoax. And that's his claim. And that one night when his mom came into the room and he was discovered, it was his mom found out, so the ruse was over. And that's why they created this whole story. The problem with this dismissal by this cynic is that there are documents that prove that his leg was severed. It is completely untrue to say that there was no proof of this, because there are the two surgeons. Remember the two surgeons, Juan de Estanga and Diego Milarillo? Now, they were interviewed and they testified, as well as the assistant surgeon, Juan Lorenzo Garcia. These are all part of the historic record. Pascual de Cacho, who testified under oath that the leg of Miguel had really been amputated. So that's several people at a time when taking an oath was something very serious. People feared for their eternal damnation if they did not tell the truth when under oath. So it's not like today, taking an oath. Many people don't take it seriously at all. Many people don't believe in the Bible at all. But times were different back then. So keep that in mind, as well as the fact that it was the Spanish Inquisition. You wouldn't really want to lie to those folks. They were kind of brutal. There is also the priest overseer. So these facts triggered a retraction by the publisher of Dunning's work. At least one of these doctors was involved in the aftercare of Miguel and supervised the surgery. So again, the dismissal of this is kind of on weak ground, and it's still not really a legitimate critique of this miracle. So now, in an interview with this author, because the book is written in Italian, the author had some interesting things to say. He started off by saying that he was really filled with doubt about this investigation. He did not think it could possibly be true because it was just so extraordinary. But try as he may, he just couldn't dismiss it. He ended up saying that it was indubitably a fact. And although there were dozens of witnesses that knew Miguel with one leg and then with two, it could well have been thousands, because that's how many people had seen him over the course of time with just one leg, and that knew him beforehand with two, and then again later with back to having two legs again. So it's really quite an extraordinary story with an extraordinary amount of witnesses to the facts. The trial itself would have been long and rigorous canonical process to ferret out bogus claims of miracles, because at that time the Catholic Church was very concerned about having too many of these sort of fake miracles. They didn't want it to disparage the religion or denigrate the religion, and so they were very much opposed to having miracles that really were not legit. And so, as a matter of fact, in that time frame, although you would have had Marian apparitions in France, Italy, and Germany, there were none reported in Spain. And that is because they were so strongly against any kind of things that could come forward and be later found to be fraudulent or a hoax. Now, he was also asked, why do you think that this has come to the light now? Why now? And his response was that he thought that now was the time that perhaps the world needed to hear this story. And of course, that raises the question, how did it ever get forgotten? And he explains that at the time in Spain, there was a lot going on. In a few weeks, Portugal had broken away, Catalonia was rebelling, the Spanish regiments were losing. Things were so chaotic that Duke Gaspar de Olivares quipped that he didn't know if Spain would exist in a year. So things were really rocky at the time. So something like this miracle would be easily lost in the sort of fury of activities and events, historical events that were going on simultaneously. Shortly after that, there was plague and then famine. So all these historical events conspired, so to speak, for this to be lost to time. Then, of course, came the Enlightenment, and scientists really didn't want to have something like this hanging around, and so it had to be completely buried because there was no real explanation for it, you see. They saw it as an embarrassment, and it needed to be forgotten to the dustbin of history. And finally, the thing that I found that he said that was most profound about all this was, explain why it is that miracles are so easily dismissed sometimes, and that there always seems to be something that we can say, well, that this or that, and sort of say it's all a hoax and dismiss it. And he said it's because, you see, God proposes, he does not impose. And so ultimately, it's as if God has this sort of restraint set on himself to never make something have so much overwhelming evidence that it is impossible to deny. Because he always wants to leave that bit where we have freedom of choice to believe or not to believe. So what's it going to be? What do you think? Do you think that you could believe in this miracle? What are your thoughts? I'd love to know whether you think this is a miracle, a true miracle. I mean, as I do. And I say this as an ex-atheist, okay? So I never dreamt in a million years I'd be saying I believe in miracles. But I'm starting to see that there's quite a few of them that have quite a bit of evidence. And this has to be the most well-documented in history miracle. There's lots of others that I'm going to be also going through, and I've got a couple books that I'm reviewing right now that I want to talk about in other videos. But please check out the other miracles that I've talked about. I hope that you'll find these inspiring and help you in your journey to believing in God, to finding God, because I think everyone comes to God in their own time. I'm hoping to help you along in that journey for anyone who's interested in listening. I'm not looking to get into any fights with anybody. I'm just putting this out there in the hopes that it might help someone. I hope you have a good night and a better tomorrow.